Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing today and thank the witnesses for being here. The title of today's hearing is Undermining Democratic Institutions and Splintering NATO, Russian Disinformation Aims. Now, I think the scope of this hearing is, as announced, is perfect if it took place a year ago. But let's be honest, we're here today because Russia engaged in an unprecedented criminal attack against the United States by illegally hacking information and releasing it in a controlled way to influence the 2016 presidential election. This is indisputable. 17 American intelligence agencies concurred in an assessment published in January. The witnesses today have shed light on Russia's nefarious activities. But due to their status as private citizens, they cannot comment on the real issue at hand, namely, why did the Russian government believe that Donald Trump would be a sympathetic partner and attempt to tip the scales in his favor? Were there anyone within the Trump campaign, the transition team, or the administration colluded with the Russian government to undermine our democratic elections? And what we can do to ensure that this type of interference never happens in another American election? The only way to do this is to hear from witnesses from the Trump campaign and the Trump administration, including Michael Flynn and Jeff Sessions testifying under oath. And I firmly believe that the most appropriate context for such an investigation is with an independent, bipartisan commission, and that's why I, along with every single Democrat in the House, have signed on to H.R. 356, the Swalwell-Cummings Protect Our Democracy Act. It confounds me that there are members of this body who do not support the independent commission. The very fundamentals of our democracy are at stake. As elected officials, we have more at stake than anybody to get the bottom of what happened in the 2016 election and to find out what ties, if any, President Trump and his administration actually have with Russia. A partisan investigation held under the cover of the intelligence committees simply will not suffice. The American people deserve to know the truth. Any investigation needs to be held in the light of day so that Americans concerned about the undermining of our democracy can hold those responsible accountable. The Swalwell-Cummings legislation is referred solely to this committee, and I urge the chairman to bring it up, and let's have a markup and vote on it. In the meantime, we must send a clear message to the Russian government and other governments who I can assure you are eagerly watching to see how we react, that we will not stand for their brazen interference in democratic elections in this country and around the world. We need to build upon the sanctions put in place by the Obama administration and pass the Engel-Conley Secure Our Democracy Act, which would put in place sanctions against anyone who interferes in an American election from overseas. We must send a warning to anyone thinking about meddling in future American elections. Additionally, we must acknowledge the widespread hacking and misinformation efforts in which Russia is already engaged in Europe and pass a bipartisan resolution I introduced this week with my Republican colleague Peter Roskam, condemning Russia's interference in European elections and reinforcing the necessity of strong sanctions against those who seek to undermine democratic institutions through cyber warfare and misinformation. And I hope all my colleagues will join on this resolution. What Russia has done and continues to do is declare war against Western liberal democracy. While his tactics may be high-tech, Putin's motives are very familiar. He sees democracy and everything that comes with it, elections, a free media, transparency, and accountability, as enemies to be defeated. I do not accept Putin's worldview. The Russian people are not our enemy to be defeated. But I think we're naive if we don't acknowledge the full extent of Putin's war against the West and respond forcefully. Make no mistake, Putin sees this as a zero-sum game. In order for him to be stronger, the United States and our allies must be weaker. But we have a secret weapon that Putin cannot and will not ever understand, and that is our democracy, based on universal values. Putin sees the truth as an enemy and rules with an iron fist so that the true extent of his crimes against the Russians are fully revealed. We cannot revert to a tactic used by Putin himself to hide what really happened in this country last year. This is not about politics. This is about the very fundamentals of our democracy and what makes America, America. And the strongest refutation of Putin's plans is to unite in a serious and thoughtful defense of our democracy. Contrary to what some on the other side have suggested, no one wants war. What we want is the truth and a way forward. And as Bob Kagan, the former Reagan official and respected conservative expert on international affairs, said last week in the Washington Post, the longer the American people remain in the dark about Russian manipulations, the longer they will remain vulnerable to them. The longer Congress fails to inform itself, the longer it will be before it can take steps to meet the threat, end quote. The truth is that the truth will set us free. But we won't know the truth if we make no attempt to find it. And I apologize to the witnesses for using my time to speak rather than ask questions, But this is important. We owe it to our constituents, to our families, to our allies, and to ourselves to discover exactly what happened last year in our election, how it happened, and how we can ensure it never happens again in this country. And I implore my colleagues, let's put aside politics. Let's get to the bottom of this. The testimony of our witnesses today only confirms the urgency of doing this. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to put into the record the assessment of 17 intelligence agencies entitled Background to Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in Recent U.S. Elections, and the Washington Post piece by Mr. Kagan entitled Republicans Are Becoming Russia's Accomplices.
Without objection, we go now